when AIDS was like a death sentence and they didn't have any medicines, they would work out their grief with ecstasy on the dance floor. I went to the people that were selling ecstasy. I was given 20,000 doses. We will use that to fight the DEA.
Well, Rick, few people have shaped the modern history of psychedelics like yourself.
Yeah.
In 1986, you founded the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing psychedelic science, and also ending prohibition, which I think is very important.
Yes.
And that mission continues today through Lycos Therapeutics, the public benefit company MAPS created to bring MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD through the regulatory process. And well, your work has helped bring psychedelic therapy from the underground to the edge of medical approval. So for me, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very much. And how are you today? How are you feeling?
Very good. Very good. I'm so excited to be talking with you today and to do more public education. And the conference is very interesting. So it's a delight to be here.
It's a great setting to have this conversation. So my first question is something I've heard I've been seeing interviews that they made you like from years now. And one thing that comes up every once in a while is that like going back to the early days, I've heard that when MDMA was first being outlawed in the early 80s, you actually helped fund legal defense against its prohibition by selling MDMA yourself, which I think, okay, this is an OG. Yeah, and is that
that's true. Yes,
and the other one is, what was going through your mind at that time?
What was more true is that I first tried MDMA in 1982, and that's when it was still legal. And but it was used as a therapy drug. About 500,000 doses had been used since the middle 70s till the early 80s.
Wow.
And it was kept quiet. It was done in people's homes, and it was more for therapy and for personal growth. Mm-hmm. But then some of those people that used it that way decided that since it was legal, it was better than cocaine, that they could sell it and use it more in parties, and then that turned it into ecstasy. Mm-hmm. And so when I learned about it, it was both a therapy drug, but it was starting to be a party drug. And that was during the time of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan and the Just Say No and the escalation of the drug war. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty clear that the police would eventually come to criminalize ecstasy. But because it was unknown to the police about the therapy use, those of us that were interested in the therapy use had this several-year head start to try to prepare for the lawsuit against the DEA to try to keep MDMA legal as a medicine. Mm-hmm. We knew we couldn't keep it legal for non-medical purposes, but so I started a nonprofit before MAPS in 1984 in anticipation of the lawsuit. And so I went to the people that were selling ecstasy, and I said, you're ruining it for the therapists, and you're making millions of dollars, and you're selling so much ecstasy that you should pay a tax to us, to the therapists. You're going to help criminalize MDMA, and you should give us this tax, and then we will use that to fight the DEA. That will benefit you, because it will keep it legal for a little bit longer, but it will also try to benefit us. Maybe we could win this lawsuit to keep MDMA as a medicine. And so I was given 20,000 doses of MDMA.
Wow.
For this tax.
Yeah.
And yes, and so then...
so the tax came in species.
The tax came in, and they also let me buy... around 19,000 for $3 each as well. So we could distribute it when it was still legal, and then use the funds to support the nonprofit. And also I knew that even though we were going to delay the DEA in this case, I thought we were most likely going to lose. And I knew that we needed then to prepare to go through the FDA. So some of the money that I raised in that way, we went to pay for 28-day toxicity studies in the dog and the rat. So in order to do human studies, you first have to do animal studies.
Right.
And a lot of the people that were doing MDMA were Buddhists or were peace and love, and they were like, we don't want to pay money to kill animals. But I'm saying we need to do that in order to get the toxicity data to go to the FDA. So it was easier to raise that money by selling MDMA.
That's wild.
So that was the nonprofit before MAPS. There's nothing like that in MAPS. MAPS is all legal donations, but that was basically 40 years ago.
Oh,
But
that's
that
amazing.
was the part of it. Other people were donating money, so it wasn't that all of our money was coming from selling MDMA. People were, so I started a nonprofit to take charitable donations.
Right.
And that's when I first started learning that this idea of mainstreaming, of using the system to be inside the system. In America, sometimes you can use the system to fight the system.
Exactly.
So you get permission to give people tax deductions, and then you can, in your charitable purpose, you can fight the government in different ways. So that was some of the history. Yes, that's true.
That's wild. That's wild, and it reminds me a lot, like here in Argentina in the 1960s, there were experiences of psychoanalysts that used LSD for therapy, and
Yes.
it's very not very well documented experiences. But yeah, when the dictatorships came here in Argentina in the 70s, all that disappeared. And that leads me to my next question.
I will say though, in the United States, there was the Controlled Substances Act of
Right.
1970 that criminalized all the substances. And again, you're right, the research was wiped out. The non-medical use at festivals and parties and all that continued, even though it was against the law. But the kind of underground use started then, and most therapists who'd done research with it gave it up, but there were some who continued to work with it in an underground way. And I would say those are the heroes,
Right.
that they risked their licenses, their careers, but they did it because they thought it was best for the patients, that they used these medicines that now we know from science and studies can be very effective in a therapeutic way. So I think the underground therapists, in a way, are big heroes, that they kept this thread alive.
Loyal to their medical oath,
Yes.
not harming and yeah, getting the best treatment possible for the persons.
Yeah.
And actually, that's why MDMA was banned in 1984.
No, in 1984 is when the DEA proposed to ban it,
Uh-huh.
and then we sued them and slowed it down.
Oh.
And then while the court was going on, while we had the case, we were winning in the courts. The judge was seeming sympathetic to the medical use of MDMA. And we were winning in what we call the court of public opinion, meaning the media and the press, because we had prepared for this. So I had people that had done MDMA that were not your classic party goers, ecstasy party dancers. There was a Roman Catholic monk who used MDMA in a half dose in the monastery to help him meditate.
Wow.
MDMA quiets your mind and you can get deeper in your meditation, and then you can learn how to do that without the MDMA. So you experience something with the drug and then you can learn without it. We had a rabbi that did MDMA and spoke to the Washington Post and said MDMA is like the Sabbath, like a delight.
Wow.
And then we had a professor from Harvard Medical School, Lester Grinspoon, who had tried it, and he'd had we just had a talk on cannabis here, and one of the discussions was cannabis for nausea and cancer chemotherapy. And so Dr. Lester Grinspoon, in the early 1970s, had a tragic situation where he had a child die of cancer, but he saw that his child didn't like the chemotherapy. It made him nauseous. He didn't want to eat. And one time they went for chemotherapy, and afterwards he wasn't so nauseous and he went out to eat. And he said, "What's going on?" And his wife, Betsy, said that she didn't tell him, but she went to the schoolyard, she bought marijuana because she'd heard that it helps with nausea, and she gave it to their son. And so once Lester saw that, he started becoming one of the major advocates in the world for medical marijuana. And he also was willing to try MDMA. And he and Betsy, his wife, they're very close. But he said that under MDMA, they were able to talk about how the death of their son had impacted them in ways that they hadn't been able to share before. And so he was willing now to talk to the media because he had done it when it was legal. So we were winning in the court of public opinion, winning in the court. And I realized that the DEA was now going to the WHO to try to criminalize MDMA internationally and then say, oh, because the international treaties, if the WHO recommends that it be criminal, then we're going to have to follow suit.
Right.
And so I went to Geneva. I was working with the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, who was sympathetic with mysticism and psychedelics and the interconnections between feeling connected to everything and more peace and, not demonizing others. So the Assistant Secretary General created a meeting for me at the WHO where I went in 1985 to explain to them that MDMA has a lot of value and that it shouldn't be just criminalized. And I met someone there who was a doctor from the University of Chicago. He was their scientific advisor, or a PhD pharmacologist, actually. And he said that one of his students was doing work with MDA, which is more stronger than MDMA in I think it was in mice, and said, oh, he saw something about hurting serotonin at nerve terminals at certain doses, but he thought it should be Schedule 3. And so then there was a famous, Phil Donahue was a TV talk show host, and he wanted to do a story on MDMA. So I thought it would be good to have this international expert from the University of Chicago speak about Schedule 3, which meant that it's still available as a medicine, but illegal for recreational use. And so I arranged for him to be on the TV show. And also was a fellow, Gene Hayslip, who was one of the head of the DEA division trying to criminalize MDMA. And so the doctor, Charles Schuster was his name, he did say that it should be Schedule 3, but he mentioned on the show that there was some concern that MDA in big doses in mice could possibly hurt the serotonin system. And what I didn't realize is that the person, Gene Hayslip from the DEA, was looking for an excuse to criminalize MDMA. We'd slowed him down. It was very frustrating. We were winning in the press, winning in the courts. And so the DEA declared an emergency because they said people could be getting brain damaged. And so in 1985, in the middle of 1985, MDMA became illegal on the basis of this emergency.
Right.
Now, MDMA doesn't cause neurotoxicity like that. But even more importantly, the DEA did not have the legal authority to declare an emergency. The Attorney General, who is the head of all of the police and the Department of Justice, had the authority to criminalize drugs on an emergency basis, but he had never what's called subdelegated, given the power to the head of the DEA. So the first year that MDMA was illegal was itself a crime. And the people that were arrested during this first year for MDMA, once their lawyers figured out that the DEA had acted without having the authority, all the people got free. So the first criminalization of MDMA was a mistake and it was illegal, it was a crime.
Wow.
But they were so
What a wild story.
DEA interested in making it criminal, because now more and more people are hearing about it in the media and all.
Right.
And then the judge said,
That's all you need to make it prohibited, yeah.
the judge agreed then. The judge said it should be Schedule 3. So even after the emergency, the DEA administrative law judge said it should be a medicine. And then the head of the DEA administrator said, I'm not going to listen to this recommendation. I'm going to criminalize it anyway. And they said, only the FDA can make a drug into a medicine. And we said, that's not the law. So then we sued again in the appeals court and won. The appeals court said the DEA logic was wrong. The law says either the Attorney General or the head of the Health and Human Services, they could either reschedule.
Yeah.
All right, so then the DEA came in and said, okay, the courts don't tell the DEA what to do. They just say if it's wrong.
Right.
So then they came up with, here's an 8-part plan of what you have to do to make a drug into a medicine. So then we sued again because the 8-part plan was exactly what the FDA would say. So then the
Right.
court said, no, you can't just pretend that the FDA, the law says the Attorney General, it can't be just the exact same. So we won twice in the appeals courts. Finally, the DEA lawyers, smart, came up with a 5-part plan that was pretty essentially the same as the FDA, but not exactly. And then the court said, okay, that can be your rule.
Right.
And it was basically the same as the FDA. And so that's where we finally lost the case. That took a couple of years. But in 1986, I could see the handwriting on the wall, and I knew that we had to go through the FDA. So that's where I started MAPS in 1986.
Wow.
So almost 40 years ago, 39 years ago.
Oh my God. I mean, and more or less at the same time, I mean, what happened in Argentina is that it was something like across Latin America, but in Argentina, from 1975 more or less, the right-wing forces, before the dictatorship in 1976, they started to spread the word about drugs being one of the main drivers of counterculture,
Yes, yes.
of subversion and left wing thinking and all that.
Yeah.
So that way they started creating also a lot of created stories about supposed harms that
Yeah.
MDMA made. And finally, in 1989, we had the law that we have until now, unchanged, which prohibited basically all drugs. And the possession of like a seed of marijuana, you can get 6 years of prison here in Argentina.
Wow.
We have had like in the past recent years some laws for medical cannabis, but anyway, the situation is very hard here. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, given that history, how do you see Latin America position itself today in the global movement of psychedelic reform?
Well, what we see is that Latin America is in most cases going to follow what happens in the United States. In Europe, it's not a leader. One of the things that's most surprising to me is that when we think about the history of psychedelics over the last 70 years or so, in the late 1950s, most people didn't know that mushrooms were psychedelic. That had been so suppressed. And that came through Mexico. A Mexican shaman, Maria Sabina, introduced mushrooms to a scientist and a banker, Gordon Wasson. And that's where we started learning, oh, mushrooms can be psychedelic. And that's what led to the research with Timothy Leary at Harvard. But the knowledge of mushrooms came from Mexico, and there still is not permission for research into mushrooms in Mexico. And so I think that there's a great need for healing from trauma, from depression, from addiction, from pain in Latin America as much as there is in the rest of the world, or maybe even more here in places. But the research is way behind. So one of the reasons I've come to Argentina for this conference is to try to see if I can help in some ways to start research with MDMA or psilocybin or 5-MeO-DMT. So we work with Canadian suppliers of MDMA. They'd be willing to provide free MDMA to scientists here if they wanted to look at MDMA for trauma or for depression or something like that. So I think that Latin America is way behind what's happening in much of the rest of the world. But the need is as great here, and the traditions of ayahuasca, of mushrooms, of peyote come from here.
Yep.
So it's still the legacy of the conquistadors when they would come, the Spaniards, the first people. The drug war has never been about drug abuse. It's always been about power.
Exactly.
So the conquistadors, when they would come, the first people that they would want to kill are the shamans, the ones that hold the culture together. So we saw that in Mexico with Cortez, that peyote was from the devil. And they would try to block peyote and block mushrooms. That's why they were so driven underground. So Latin America and South America has the history of ayahuasca, of mushrooms, of peyote, and yet, because of the repression, they're behind the rest of the world in terms of the research.
Exactly. And well, following exactly your words. I mean, here in Latin America, drug policy has been shaped by decades of prohibition and legal influence from the U.S., as you
Yeah.
just said, and then of course the so-called war on drugs. So today we're seeing a shift, and especially
Yeah.
led by countries like Colombia.
Yes.
Which are taking pretty bold steps towards reform and even exploring new approaches to regulating some banned substances. So, from your perspective, what would it take to make sure this psychedelic renaissance doesn't just extract local knowledge,
Yes.
but actually strengthens communities here?
Yes. So you mentioned Colombia. So one of our main therapists who's treated more PTSD patients with MDMA in Boulder, Colorado, and is one of our trainers of training new therapists. She grew up in Colombia. And so she's been wanting for decades and decades to bring the knowledge of MDMA therapy to Colombia and to Latin America. And so it's a long time, but 1 year from now, in October in Mexico City, we're going to have the first training of therapists that will take place entirely in Spanish. So I think it's not the drug that's the healthy part. The drugs can be used and they can help people or they can make them disoriented. It's the therapy, it's the context. So we know with shamanism, it's the shamans, it's the context that helps the experience turn out to be more beneficial. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to train therapists and then get permission for early studies.
Exactly.
And I think that a lot of times, I think within the next 12 months or less, there is likely to be, I can't say for sure, but there's likely to be some kind of early approval for MDMA by the FDA. They will require more research. I think within a year and a half or 2 years, there should be approval for psilocybin for depression in the United States. And I think that will make the countries of Latin America and Mexico and Central America more willing to open up to research. So I think, again, it'll probably start in research, and the key part for me there is training therapists.
And that leads me to my next question because I mean, MDMA assisted therapy, for example, I mean, it doesn't just take the compound. You need
Yes.
therapists, even, I mean, according to your protocol, the MAPS protocol, more than one.
Yes.
It's infrastructure, it needs insurance. So, for countries in the global south, which have like a very big strain on public health
Yeah.
spending and all, are already under a big strain. How do you envision this model becoming economically viable first, and also if there is a path toward making psychedelic therapies accessible beyond wealthy nations?
Yes. So one of the investors in the pharma company that we started, now it's no longer called Lycos, it's called Resilient.
Oh, I
So
didn't know that.
they've changed their name just 2 weeks ago. So Resilient Pharmaceuticals, both of the investors that control the company have invested from their foundations, not from their personal wealth. So they control the foundations, but the foundations are to give money away for different public health and other purposes. So Dr. Sir Christopher Hahn is one of the investors. He's a hedge fund mega billionaire from London. And he said that MDMA, once it gets approved in the United States, it should be generic in Africa and India, and also potentially in other poorer countries where there's a lot of trauma and not a lot of resources, like in Argentina, where you're saying there's not much money going into public health.
Exactly.
So the first thing is that the drug has to be generic and cheap. And then secondly, there has to be some way, I don't know, for therapists to be reimbursed for spending the time. Because the expense then, if you can make the drug generic, it costs very little to make MDMA. It's a very relatively simple process. I mean, look at how much MDMA is all over the world for $5, $10. To make it GMP, good medical practices, good manufacturing practices, acceptable for FDA, it's more expensive, but it's not necessarily more pure than what you can make for very little amount of money. but how do we pay the therapists? And so I think one of the big ways to reduce costs, which we're just starting to explore, is group therapy. So all the research that's been done so far, almost all of it, and the research that's being used to get the drug approved by the FDA in other countries around the world is individual therapy. But we're just starting to study group therapy. So there's been a group therapy project at Portland, Oregon Veterans Administration, where it would be 4 therapists for 6 veterans with PTSD. There's been studies in Israel that would also be group therapy. There's a new one that's going to be the first in the world. It's directly comparing individual therapy versus group therapy. And so group therapy will be less expensive. I think the individual therapy goes deeper because each person has more time with themselves rather than talking in the group. But with the group, people can support each other for the integration process and the after, trying to learn from the MDMA and then integrate it. So it could be that the group therapy is just as effective as the individual therapy. That's what we don't know. But if it's almost as effective but 1/5 the cost, then that also makes sense. So I think that's one. Now, the other thing that would be really critical, and this is what I think will take 10 years or more, is for the drugs to become, the psychedelics, MDMA in particular, but also psilocybin, to become legal. Not just for medicine, where hopefully you have it administered by therapists and covered by either national health insurance or whatever, but it should also be legal for people to do on their own. And for that, we need honest drug education. We need pure drugs, because right now when the drugs are illegal, often they're mixed with fentanyl or mixed with other things that make it way more dangerous. We need to train people in what we call peer support. So that's something that can then be free. I mean, friends can help each other.
I was going to
for
say,
free.
As a raver, I know the potential of group therapy with MDMA.
Well, yes. And so one of our fundraisers was gay, or is gay. And what he said is that in the 1980s, when AIDS was like a death sentence and they didn't have any medicines, he said they would work out their grief with ecstasy on the dance floor. So I also believe that raves are communal. It's a new rite of passage, and it can be very healing and very spiritual. Now, this is now almost 20 years ago, but we had 2 women contacted us the same week with a similar story, but a different outcome. Both of them had taken MDMA at a rave, and both of them had memories come to them of past rape and sexual abuse. And one of them said that she was with a bunch of her friends, and when this more serious memories came up, because MDMA reduces the fear part of our brain, so that traumatic memories that are overwhelming, under the influence of MDMA, often traumatic memories can come back. And so this woman said that she was with friends, and she knew that they were just wanting a party, that if she were to tell them this sad story that had happened to her, that she was thinking about, that they wouldn't want to know about it. And so she suppressed her feelings, and then months later she was worse off. So when stuff starts coming up, if you don't, it can destabilize you. Another woman said that she was with a girlfriend at a rave. These memories came up, and she went off into a corner with her friend to talk about it, and she felt that it helped her deal with the trauma. And now she felt better about it, and she had this idea, MDMA could be good for PTSD, and she thought she had invented the idea. So she went to the Google and she said, MDMA for PTSD, and she saw that we were studying it. And so she contacted us to tell that story. So what I'm trying to say is that raves can be therapeutic, they can be not. It depends on what happens when the emotions start coming. If you're willing to work with them, even with a friend.
No, I totally see the point of the possibility of reducing costs by group therapy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, but I think also this idea of making it legal too. But I think that will take place probably 10 years after it's legal as a medicine.
Right.
I think there were too much in the US, around the world, there's too much benefit for the corruption of the drug war. Too many people make money from keeping it illegal.
Yeah.
And so that's what we really need to change. The drug war is not about helping drug abuse. It's about making money. It's about corruption.
Controlling people.
It's controlling people. What we see in the Philippines, where the drug use was used to murder all sorts of people who might be drug users, but also might be politically opponents.
Exactly.
So the drug war is a system of repression that doesn't really help drug abuse, makes things worse, and it's associated with misinformation. That's why High Times is so good to give out accurate information. But one day we should have accurate information taught to people in schools.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then teaching people how to support each
sex
other.
education. You
Yeah.
need to have drug education.
Yeah, when sex education is, it's abstinence only, it's all too dangerous, it's all scary, then people don't know what to learn. So MAPS has done work with what we call our Zendo project.
Yeah, I know.
So the psychedelic harm reduction at raves, so at Burning Man and elsewhere, Boom Festival in Portugal, and where we train volunteers to, some of them are therapists and doctors, but some of them are underground therapists, or some of them just want to help others. We train them how to help people if they have a difficult experience. So over time, what we want is kind of a more psychedelically literate population.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so, and then we want to elevate the consciousness so that so many people are burdened by traumas. They see the world through a lens of trauma or depression, or there's also the mystical experiences that people report with ayahuasca, with peyote, where you feel connected to other people, to something bigger than yourself. And so I think that that in a proper cultural context, that can help people to feel more connected to people that are different from them, more loving, more less prejudiced. So I think you said that the military felt that the psychedelics made people more left-wing or more progressive, and it was the case that psychedelics in the 60s were connected to hippies who were protesting the Vietnam War. But I think now I overestimated the effect of the psychedelics and underestimated the effect of the culture. So now we have a lot of support from people inside the Trump administration for psychedelics.
Yep.
And I wouldn't say that they're left-wing.
Right,
So I think the culture makes more of a difference than how you interpret it than just the drug experience itself. The same way that the therapists make more of a difference than just taking it, your attitude, your preparation. But I do think that over time, the more we have psychedelic therapy, the more people can work through their traumas. We're trying to do work with Israelis and Palestinians. And they each see each other through a lens of trauma and hatred, and we need to somehow break that to see that they should find a way to live in peace. And so I think psychedelics can play a role like that. But I think it begins with medicine and science, and then there's maybe 10 years later that it begins to have drug policy reform.
Right, and I'm going to jump to that subject just in a minute. But before that, we just talked about harm reduction, and a guy that I love, and I also had the chance to interview is Carl Hart.
Oh yes, great.
Yeah, and his book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah,
Great.
here he calls a great conversation with you, where he came very angry about the idea of psychedelic exceptionalism.
Yes.
And you gave him a very good response. Like, okay, you are part of the psychedelic movement. You should go and give you lectures in these kind of places you don't like going.
Yeah.
And well, this idea of psychedelic exceptionalism, the idea that there are some drugs that better than others. And in Argentina, for instance, the legal regulation of cannabis has in a way cooled down the broader activism for drug criminalization, for the decriminalization of drug possession, which still remains a criminal offense. So given how quickly psychedelics are being medicalized and mainstreamed, what risk do you see in repeating the same moral hierarchy we have
Well,
seen in
I
cannabis?
think you need to make progress where you can. And if people are willing to be more open to psychedelics than to cocaine or to methamphetamine or heroin, we need to make progress where we can to show that demonized drugs are not all the same. I think over time it will make people question why are other drugs illegal. What I said to Carl and what I believe, and he said if he could start saying this, I said the more dangerous the drug, the more important it is that it be legal. So I think it's very important for psychedelics, cannabis to be legal, but it's even more important for cocaine and heroin not to be suppressed like that. Because I'll say one thing. Well, first off, I want to say that my father was a pediatrician. He's no longer alive, but he and his partners in Chicago, they worked on one of the first studies of women who were pregnant and using crack cocaine. And there was a big scare of crack babies. And my father and his partners did the medical evaluations of the children. And what he told me is that there is fetal alcohol syndrome, which is if you're a mother and you drink a lot of alcohol, it can be bad for your embryo, your child. But there is no such thing as crack cocaine syndrome, that it was poverty, malnutrition, drug, other things, but it wasn't from the cocaine itself. And he said that that was being misinterpreted to go and accelerate the drug war. But what he also said was that the women who were pregnant and using crack cocaine, because it was against the law, they didn't want to go get help because they were scared that they would be put in jail or babies would be taken away from them. So we pushed people away by the criminalization and made it worse. That's why I say that the more dangerous the drug, the more important it is to be legal, so that you can bring the people who have problems with it into treatment, and you can offer them treatment on demand. You can try to help them in different ways, and they're not scared of the criminal justice system to put them in jail. Same is true we see with safe injection sites for people that often will overdose on opiates or fentanyl. Now we have naltrexone and others to try to help people, come back from almost dying. I mean, we've saved many, many people by doing harm reduction or by letting them inject in a place where if they have an overdose, they can be brought back to life.
Right.
And we can offer them treatment on demand. When you treat people more humanely, a lot of them don't want to be drug addicts, that their life in some way or other has brought them to that point. But if you treat them humanely, some of them will say, give me more treatments, or let me do Ibogaine, or let me do methadone, or whatever. So I think that while I do think that there are differences between psychedelics and other drugs, that we should treat them all in a way that they should all be legal. But I do think that we should make progress wherever we can. But the other thing I want to say about Carl Hart, which was, he did something that I'm very, very proud of. So he said that, because we let people do drugs at work at MAPS. So most companies are like, you can't do drugs at work. But for us, it's not about the state of consciousness, it's about your performance.
Exactly.
So what we say is that if you and your manager think that what you're doing is as good or better when you're high on a drug, then you can do it at work. And so we did that, and Carl said, well, you should put that in your employee manual. You should make that something more formal. So we did that. And so we have what we call smokable tasks. All right, so what I like to do with cannabis is, brainstorming. So brainstorming, creative thinking. When you've got a problem, using cannabis to do brainstorming is a great thing. And so that's a smokable task. If you want to use marijuana at work,
Amazing.
smoke with me or smoke by yourselves. But other people can use different drugs for different things. It depends. Somebody uses low amounts of ketamine to do spreadsheets. I mean, who would have ever thought ketamine low dose for spreadsheets? But they say that they're better. And so if you and your manager think you're as good or better, and then smokable tasks is more what we call a euphemism. It's not, people think it just means cannabis, but it really means anything. And so that's from Carl Hart, that we now have a different kind of drug policy at MAPS about our employees. And people, it's all different for different persons. So I really have a debt of gratitude for Carl
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
mentioned Israel, Palestine, and
Yeah.
the work that MAPS is doing in the West Bank
Yeah.
to make accessible
Yeah.
treatment with psychedelics. So, in the recent years, the psychedelic movement, especially in the US, has grown fast and also became more divided. And some push like to institutionalize like the commercial therapies quickly, and others say that this rush could recreate some of the hierarchies or some of the blind spots that prohibition did. And there's some, I mean, like very, like in the last 2 weeks, I've seen like Hamilton Morris saying that been accusing of leftism terrorists of some groups, and
Yes,
on the
yes,
other
yes.
side, they accuse MAPS of being complicit to like big capital and also to with associated with the military complex where
Yes.
that has presence in places where human rights are being violated. So you have always described psychedelics as a tool against war and dehumanization. So, how can the movement stay true to those humanistic ideals while working inside systems that don't often share those values?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've tried to do is get bipartisan support, is work with Republicans and Democrats and around the world. The other thing that we want to do is work on both sides of conflicts. So we want to work with Israelis. We want to work with Palestinians. We're doing work in Lebanon. I'm going to Dubai and Abu Dhabi in a few weeks. So I think that when we want to work with soldiers that have got trauma, a lot of soldiers in America have what's called moral injury, which means that they went to Iraq, they went to Afghanistan, they thought they were doing something good. Adam Mars, who is here, spoke about that.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when you help soldiers process their emotions, I think that that is helpful for them to, because soldiers are taught not to pay attention to their emotions, that when you're in battle, you can't pay attention to your emotions. But sometimes then they act too quickly, they're triggered from their trauma. So I think that we need to help the soldiers. So I think it's our obligation to go where the suffering is, and I don't think that fuels the war machine. I think it makes it where you've got more people that are talking about the emotional consequences of it. And so some people will still want to fight, some people will not, but hopefully we'll help people understand the emotional consequences of war, and we won't go to war so quickly.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Rick, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been amazing talking to you.
Thank you.